You have to be very careful because leaders who are resented have a very hard time persuading people to want to do what they want them to do.
Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. Think of us as Lincoln's Chicago address.
Here he is an example of an Army employee who was appealing to Lincoln because he was fired for allegedly giving statements in favor of George McClellan, who was going to, of course, run against Lincoln in November of '64. He argues, Foster does, essentially, he was being framed by the Democrats who opposed pro-union politics in his native state of Kentucky. And so Lincoln writes in this, I know nothing of this gentleman or this case except as presented by these papers. I merely submit to the Provost Marshal General whether an inquiry is not due him. And so in your book, you talk about a time when you had a Republican whispering campaign against you while working at the J5 at the Pentagon in the 90s.
Absolutely.
And so rumor had it also that because you had been a Rhodes Scholar, you and Clinton were in cahoots, and that's one of the reasons that you had some problems. Right. It happens in the Civil War, and it happened to you.
Oh, it happens all over. I mean, the military is full of intrigues and jealousy. It's like any
So was graduate school, by the way?
Oh, sure. I mean, you know, people always say you've never seen politics until you've seen academic politics.
Exactly.
But, I mean, politics, jealousy, intrigue, it's the stuff of human existence. Always has been, probably always will be. You just have to accept it. You have to fight back against it, and you have to be aware of it. But there's no point in bewailing human nature. Human nature is human nature.
Here's something I wanted to ask you about as well. Again, we're going to have to do this fairly quickly. But Lincoln is a favorite of ours here at the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, of course. And
but can I just go back to that other case?
Yes, please. We don't know. There's nothing in the records that says that he was reinstated. So he was out.
When I was a general in the Balkans, I took a Republican senator, Phil Graham, in to have Christmas dinner with the troops in Bosnia. And on the way out, he said to me, "It must be really tough working for the commander-in-chief you're working for." Trying to elicit from me a response that would condemn Bill Clinton. And I said, "Senator, I don't know what you're talking about. The troops like him." Now, the same has to hold true for Dave Petraeus today, or for John Abizaid, or George Casey, or Rick Sanchez. These men were loyal up the chain of command, and they expected loyalty down the chain of command. That's the obligation of the armed forces. How you vote is your private matter, but how you speak about it in an official capacity is not a private matter. You must be loyal.
In any organization?
Absolutely.
No,
and it's true in the United States Armed Forces, too.
Well, sure. We have 9 more minutes, I believe, and I guess I could get you some books, but that's I have another question I really wanted to talk with you about.
Because I interrupted your other question.
No, that's all right. We have so many of them anyway. James McGregor Burns called Lincoln a transforming leader, meaning that he motivated by persuasion. Now, Don Phillips, in a book called Lincoln on Leadership, which I recommend if you have not read it. It's a fascinating book. In Lincoln, he said, did a number of things. He provided statements on direction to justify his actions. He had an effective vision that he said can't be forced, but has to be put in motion by persuasion. He had Lincoln did a roving or wandering style, that he went out to the cabinet members' offices. He went out to the hospitals. He went out to the field. He kept himself abreast of what was happening out there so he wasn't isolated. He aimed his vision to the common person so they could understand where he was going and wanted to bring them. He called on the past and related it to the present and used both to provide a link to the future. The Gettysburg Address is a good example of that, actually. He understood and listened to others. He took responsibility. He was open and fair. This is what we hear from Don Phillips on Lincoln on Leadership. What are your leadership principles in 5 minutes or
Oh,
less.
I'd endorse every one of those. I think those are great principles. I mean, I think it starts, what I try to explain in the book about leadership is it starts with understanding that not everybody is going to agree on everything that you say. And I learned that from my family relationship with my parents. You can still love them. You may not agree with everything they say. And you have to work to bridge differences in people. You can't simply command obedience and expect to receive belief. So you work with people's attitudes as you find them and work to bridge the differences. I think the second thing is that you have to respect the people that you lead. They will respect you, and you shouldn't worry about that. But you must respect them. These draftees in Vietnam, there were a couple with college educations, but most of them had high school. Some of them hadn't finished high school. And they saved my life. When I called for them to come, they came into the fire, into the battle. They didn't want to be there. They didn't volunteer to go to Vietnam, but they came. And I love them for it, and I respected them as soldiers. And they knew I respected them. Even though, you know, I was this highfalutin West Point Rhodes Scholar with glasses on and everything, and they were, you know, the kids that never made good grades in high school and ended up getting drafted. They respected me, and I respected them. But the leadership starts with the respect of the leader for the led, not the other way around. That's the second principle. I think the third thing is to recognize that leadership is all about performance. It's not about style. You don't have to look like Lincoln to be a great leader like Lincoln. It's not about how you smoke a pipe or what the angle is on your cap when you're wearing it. It's not how you walk. It's not whether you swagger the right way and roll your shoulders like the king chimpanzee in the chimpanzee pit at the zoo. It's about how you relate to others. Leadership is transactional. It's about persuading the other fellow to want to do what you want him or her to do. Mm-hmm. That's what leadership is, and you have to use a combination of reasoning, a combination of appeal, a combination of flattery and charm, along with the occasional threat or concern. I guess the fourth thing I'd say is the leader has to maintain high standards himself. He can't ask for other people to want to do things that he himself shows that he doesn't want to do. So whether it's the parent not eating vegetables at the dinner table and then demanding the child eat the vegetables, or not maintaining good health for themselves and demanding the child have healthy habits, on into the military, of leaders who can't do physical training but want the troops to pass a PT test, leaders who are overweight but don't want the troops to be overweight, leaders who aren't good marksmen but want the troops to be good marksmen. Leader has to lead by example. You have to have good standards. And then you have to teach other people to absorb those standards and make them their own. Leadership is much more about teaching than it is about anything else. It's about teaching. It's about inspiring. Everything that Lincoln has, I would endorse as principles. They'll work. I was just talking to a company commander in the Army who was asking me about his company and what he should do with people who don't pass the PT test and so forth. And I was reminding him, look, the institution has enormous power. The Army can break people. You can't fire them, but you can break them. You can take rank away from them, you can take money away from them, you can punish them. But that's the last resort. You want to be a positive leader if you can. If you can afford it in terms of the mission and the time available, build a sense of teamwork, an esprit, we're in it together, and charm them and make them like you before you have to crack down on them. Mm-hmm. There's a sort of colloquial saying around America that, I'd rather be respected than liked. Sure, but that's usually not the choice. If you're liked, you're often respected. But if you're disliked, you're often hated and resented. And that's far from being respected. So you often don't have the choice between like and respect. It's more like respect or resent. You have to be very careful because leaders who are resented have a very hard time persuading people to want to do what they want them to do. Mm-hmm.